Welcome, class. Welcome to week one of our World Christianity Project. We're extremely glad that you're here with us, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you the speakers that we're going to be having today. My name is Professor Jonathan J. Armstrong, and I teach at Moody in Spokane. I'm delighted that you're here with us. Our first lecture is going to be delivered by Dr. Todd Johnson. Dr. Todd Johnson is the Associate Professor of Global Christianity and the Director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. There he researches the status of Christianity and world religions in every people, language, country, and city. While under his leadership, the Center's statistics have been frequently quoted in the media, recently by ABC, BBC, Associated Press, The New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. Dr. Johnson, we're extremely glad that you've been able to join us today.
Are you hearing that? No, nothing. Okay.
Let me also welcome our other panel members.
They're probably just not presenting.
After Dr. Todd Johnson's lecture on the state of global Christianity around the world, we will have as our panelists Dr. Joel Carpenter. Dr. Joel Carpenter is a professor of history and the director of the Nagel Institute for the Study of World Christianity at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He has a long-standing interest in American religious and cultural history, but he has been working lately in the history of Christianity in Africa and Asia. Dr. Carpenter also recently edited the text that we have on as one of our assigned reading texts. The text is entitled Christian Higher Education, A Global Reconnaissance, published in 2014 from Erdman's Press. And we're very honored to have also on our panel with us Dr. Dana Robert. She is the Truman Collins Professor of World Christianity and History of Mission at Boston University. She has directed over 60 doctoral dissertations, and former students hold teaching and ministry positions around the world. In 2011, she delivered a keynote address at the Global Christian Forum in Mandaso, Indonesia. In 2010, she delivered the Alexander Duff and Henry Drummond Lectures in Scotland, the opening keynote lecture of the historic Edinburgh 2010 conference, and the Henry Martin Lectures at Cambridge University. Her most recent books are Christian Mission, How Christianity Became a World Religion, available from Wiley Blackwell, now in its 6th printing, and many other texts. We're extremely glad to have these speakers and panelists with us. Thank you so much for being with us. Over to you, Dr. Johnson.
Okay, I'm very pleased to be with you today. I'm going to give a short lecture on navigating global Christianity. Last year, I was invited by 600 Filipinos and Koreans to give 3 different lectures on global Christianity, global religion, and global mission. This is the first of the 3, and I've added a couple of interesting things from the other 2, so that's the context of what I want to do today. Fortunately for us, I have some really nice slides. If we can go to the next one, please. This is the Atlas of Global Christianity that our Center for the Study of Global Christianity published a few years ago. It is an atlas that was commemorating the 1910 World Missionary Conference held in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we were able then to update things a bit for over the 100-year period. And I want to present to you some of the findings of this book. So let's go to the next slide. And this atlas is the first scholarly atlas to document the shift of Christianity to the global south. And you'll see from this map where Christianity is growing the fastest, actually in the present day, which would have been the year 2000 to 2010. And there's a definite southern cast to where Christianity is growing the fastest. So the darker colors show faster growth. And you even have interesting things like Mongolia, where Christianity is growing very fast in this period. Next slide. We also were able to map out world religion. So you could see the strength of world religion. This is an unusual map in that it shows the strength of religion by province, of which there were 3,000 provinces. Only about 230 countries, but 3,000 provinces. And you probably recognize the colors here. The blue is Christian, the green is Islam, pinkish color is Hinduism, orange Buddhism, and then in China there you have agnostics, which would be the non-religious, and atheists really as a separate category, but also Chinese folk religion, and then Mongolia again you have shamanism, which is what we refer to as ethno-religion. What's unusual about this map is that you see the relative strength of each of the majority religions in every province of the world. And this is in the year 2010. So that gives some indication of that. The next slide, we were able to put 8 pages on religious freedom around the world. This is by Brian Grimm of the Pew Forum, who's written several books, and they produced several reports on this. But Brian did a very special treatment of religious freedom for the Atlas. And here you see the darker red colors are the places where it's tougher to be a religionist of any kind. So this is a treatment of all the different religions, and this is the kind of assessment that shows the context that people of faith find themselves in all over the world. And fortunately, you can go to the Pew Forum even today and see many updates since the time of the Atlas. A lot of really good reports that you can download. So I'd recommend that to you. Next, we have the reason why it's a good idea to map religious affiliation at the provincial level. This is a country that was one country in 2010 when we published, and is now 2 countries. And some of you probably recognize this as Sudan, which is now Sudan and Southern Sudan. It's pretty easy from this map to see where the line between the two is. That is, the green color in the north is majority Muslim, and the blue color in the south here majority Christian. And there are situations all around the world where countries are made up of religions of varying strengths in different parts of the country, and that's what we were trying to do here. The next map shows us why we talk about global Christianity, and that is that in the Atlas there were 6 major traditions that were covered, probably recognizable to most of us. The Anglican tradition, the Orthodox, the Catholic, the Protestant, the Independent, and the Marginal. And this shows the relative strength of each of those around the world. And so there's some obvious things here, like Roman Catholics being very strong in Latin America, and the Orthodox in Eastern Europe and Russia. But then we have a mixture. A place like Africa, sometimes the Catholics are the most numerous, sometimes Anglicans, sometimes Protestants, sometimes the Independent Church. And this gives you some indication of how that goes. Okay, the next map shows us how to use our Atlas. And I just put this in here because I think it helps to see the sort of things that we're trying to feature, at least at the continental or regional level. Part 3 of the Atlas, which is really the bulk of the Atlas, is made up of essays and maps and charts and tables related to Christianity in various continents and regions. And this is the Africa page here, which shows you that we are trying to contrast 1910 and 2010, the 100-year period. You can see that in the bar graphs in the upper left-hand corner. I realize they're probably small, but Christianity, you could see, was only about 9% of Africa in 1910 and grew to almost half by 2010. And the brown on the top in 1910 are the tribal religionists, the ethno-religionists, and they've shrunk considerably, and now it's Christianity and Islam that dominate the religious landscape of Africa. And then you can see in your maps where Christianity is the strongest, and if we put Islam on the map, you'd see a very clear north-south divide here. So this is to help you to navigate. Next slide shows us that we invited 64 scholars from every region of the world, and for a book coming out in 2010 on global Christianity, we felt that it was very important that these essays were written by people from the countries or the regions that they're writing about. And so Christianity in Eastern Africa, well, there's many good German scholars who've been there a long time who could write excellent essays, but we chose a Kenyan scholar to write this essay, and pretty consistently throughout this book we invited people from the regions to tell the story over the 100-year period of what had happened in Christianity in their region. Okay, so the next slide shows that if you have an atlas, you have a CD in the back, and you can export any graph, any map, even the tables, for use in a presentation. And all of the maps and graphs that I'm using in this presentation were done using the CD that comes with every atlas. So that we feel is helpful for classroom and lecture use. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and talk about what the subject that is under study here of global Christianity. And we can see right away that we have a slight problem, and that is that Christianity is basically been about a third of the world's population throughout the last 125 years. And so in one sense, this is not very interesting. If you're in the hospital and you look over at the monitor on your left and it looks like this is probably the last thing you'll ever see. But this masks of some very important changes, which are probably the main subject of our talks today, and that is the shifting landscape of Christianity over the 100-year period. So in the next slide, we see the proportion of the world's Christians who are in Europe and who are in each of the continents, but in particular we see Europe and Northern America, 66%, almost 15%. If you add these together, you are over 80%. So many people have, of course, commented on this, that over 80% of the world's Christians 100 years ago were European and North American. This is the Western world sort of dominating the demographics of Christianity around the world. But let's watch very carefully as we switch to the next slide, and we see a profoundly different pie chart here. You'll notice that the 66% in 1910 has now shrunk to only about a quarter, about 25%, and even the 14.9% of North Americans has shrunk to 12.3. Now, if you add 12 and 25 together, you realize you are now under 40%. So this is sort of the basic facts of the shift in global Christianity. Remember, still about a third of the world's population, but now a very different complexion, if you will, of Christianity, with Latin America, Africa, Asia taking up an increasing proportion. In fact, this looks rather evenly distributed, even though the populations of these are slightly different. It gives some indication of what we're talking about when we talk about world Christianity or global Christianity, Christianity around the world. So this is the basic facts that we might consider. Now, what does it mean? I like to go. If we go to the next slide, I like to use a Chinese designer who had moved to Berlin. She's a graphic designer, and she noticed some profound differences between German culture that she was new to, and the Chinese culture that she had come from. So as a graphic designer, she designed a series of icons that, in just a glance, gave some indication of the difference between German and Chinese. So let's take a look at these. First of all, we have punctuality, which is the first of these slides. And we can see the Germans, who are now blue on the left, and the Chinese, who are red on the right. The Germans are always on time. It's very important to be punctual, but in China, you know, there's a little bit of leeway in when you arrive somewhere. 15 minutes or more is just fine. So that's a contrast between these two cultures. The next slide shows us the handling of problems. The Germans just walk right through the problem, and the Chinese maybe go a little bit around, not so direct. And of course, she's noticed this in everyday life there in Berlin. The next slide shows a queue when waiting, with the Germans all neatly lined up and the Chinese bunched together against the window. Again, showing a contrast in these two. Next, we have the opinion, where again the Germans very direct and the Chinese culture quite indirect. So it's easy to see that there are many profound differences between the Germans and the Chinese. Now the next slide brings us to contacts, and when I saw this, I began to think, didn't we just a few minutes ago talk about the shift in global Christianity from the West, or the global North, from Europe and North America to the global South, demographically speaking? And if we thought that the global North was represented here by the German slide of just a few contacts, and the Chinese represent more of the global South, then we see a huge web of contacts. And we begin to think about the nature of Christianity, and where does Christianity fit best in these kind of cultures. Well, let's go one more. The next slide is the way of life. And this is really, I think, a profound difference, the individual versus the group. And I think many of you realize that when you read the New Testament, one of the mistakes that English speakers make is to consider the word you in its singular throughout the New Testament and read it that way, where in fact it's almost always plural. And in that sense, it makes more sense to the Chinese culture on the right here. And I think this represents then the difficulty of trying to understand this shift in light of what it means for understanding the Christian faith and for the spread of the Christian faith in the future. So, and wouldn't it be a terrible thing in light of this if most of the theological training in the Global South was done in a German fashion or a Northern fashion, and that in many ways is the central problem. This can be illustrated in the next slide. A friend of mine in Malaysia, who is Chinese, he wrote a book called Mangoes or Bananas, and the subtitle is The Quest for an Authentic Asian Theology and Missiology. And he said the problem in Asia is that Asian Christianity is largely like a banana. It's yellow on the outside but white on the inside. And what he's referring to is the theological training and the impact of Western style thinking on the Asian Christian community. But he says, wouldn't it be wonderful if Christianity in Asia was more like a mango, so that it was yellow on the outside and yellow on the inside. And that, I think, represents probably the largest theological project in world Christianity, and that is sort of de-Westernizing and recontextualizing the gospel, because I think most of us are aware of the fact that what is really special about Christianity is its ability to grow up in any culture, any language, any philosophical background, and that's really what this shift in global Christianity represents, especially on the theological level. Now we could go a step further, and the next slide is a slide showing Daniel Kim at Chiang Mai Theological Seminary, who makes the comment, if you might need to advance again, that the biggest issue the church in Asia is facing is a severe violation of the incarnational principle from both missionaries and local church leaders. Contextualization has been very poor, making Christianity so foreign to the local people. And this is another way of expressing this need for making Christianity more indigenous, especially in Thailand, where I've spent a considerable amount of time. Most Thai people feel fairly strongly that Christianity is a Western religion and foreign. And that has to be ironic in light of the facts that we've just laid out, that especially in the last 100 years, Christianity has become much more global, spread out among many, many different cultures and languages. So this is, again, one of the big challenges, not only within Christianity, you might say, as a way in which Christians need to recapture the faith within the context of their own cultures, but also for the extension of Christianity into new cultures, because obviously you wouldn't want it to be Western. You wouldn't want it really to be Korean or Filipino or Nigerian either. So when it's going into new places, it's a challenge for missionaries of all kinds to see the gospel to be indigenous. Okay, so that's one particular set of challenges that we can talk about. Now I'd like to think about a couple of other things. So let's go to the next slide. One of our problems in the Atlas of Global Christianity, we uncovered the fact that there are 41,000 Christian denominations in the world, and so this is a lot of fragmentation, and that's not churches. Those are groups of churches, denominations, networks, and that sort of a thing. So I think that's a particular challenge for us. It reminds me of a joke that I heard once, and I'll relay it to you here, and that is of a man who was stranded on a desert island for many years. And finally a ship came by to rescue this man, and the captain came down from the ship onto the shore. He saw 3 huts sitting there, like this painting shows, and he asked the man, he said, you know, it's amazing you've lived all these years here on this island by yourself. Tell me about how you've survived, and what are these huts? And so the fellow said, well, the first hut is where I've lived all of these years, and the second hut is where I go to church. And the captain said, well, then what's the third hut? And he says, oh yeah, that's where I used to go to church. So even one person can't stay put within on a desert island. And I think this illustrates the problem that we face within Christianity. I should point out that most of these denominations are what we label as Protestant or independent. So much of this affects global evangelicalism, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes as we conclude. The next slide gives us some indication of how religious change works, and you again may need to advance here to see the different parts of the graphic. There are 6 dynamics in how a religious group grows or shrinks, and they're quite simply in 3 different sets. So the first set, if we advance, is births and deaths. So the way that you bring more people into your community is by having children, and the way you lose people is through the death, usually of older people, but it can be anybody. So those are 2 dynamics of gain and of loss. The next we're familiar with is converts to and converts from. So if people convert to your religion, then you have more people, and if they leave, then you have less. So I guess that's pretty obvious. Then there's a third set which is immigration and emigration. And this only happens at the level of countries. We study 234 different countries in the world, and we see that migration, which is these two, has quite an impact on Christian demographics. So if Christians immigrate into an area, then that area becomes more Christian. If they leave, it becomes less Christian. And two examples, easy examples, the United States is actually gaining Christians through immigration because most immigrants are Christian. The vast majority are Christian from Latin America and other places, whereas the Middle East, which is in the news, of course, right now, is losing Christians through emigration, people leaving, coming to places like the United States or Britain or Australia, or even in the surrounding countries. So these six dynamics are how you grow and how you shrink. Now, the next slide will show us the net gain in relation to our atlas. Going back to this again, you see up on the upper left there were 2.2 billion, 265 billion Christians, or in millions in the way it's shown here. And there was a net increase of 27.8 million Christians to make 2.293, almost 2.3 billion in 2010. But if we think in terms of gains and losses, you see on the in the middle there you have 45 million Christian births and 16 million converts to Christianity for 65 million new Christians. But then on the very bottom line, of course, we have the losses through Christian deaths, 21 million, and defectors, or people who've left Christianity, about 12 million a year, and then you have your total losses there. You're probably wondering, why isn't there immigration and emigration on this? Well, this is a global assessment, and until people move to other planets or whatever, most people just stay on the Earth. So we don't have that set of dynamics for this global analysis. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Another challenge is that Christian resources are not evenly distributed. Remember, 60% of Christians today are in the global south, which is Africa, Asia, Latin America. Here's the global north with 40% now, as we said earlier. But you can see that the global south has only 17% of all Christian annual income, and the global north has 83%. And this is a subject that is dealt with in virtually every global, even regional meeting of Christians. It's something that has to be considered. Then the next slide shows us what you probably already know, that Christians speak a multitude of languages. You might not know that Spanish is the #1 mother tongue of Christians and has been since about 1980. This is due not to Spain being some amazing place, although it probably is, but this is Latin America, Spanish in Latin America in a demographic sense. English is second, and then we have Portuguese, which again is not Portugal but Brazil, and then we have Russian and Mandarin. Mandarin being one of the newer languages coming up from the large number of Christians in China. And then we have other languages, Tagalog and Amharic, Korean, coming up the list rapidly. Then within Christianity, if we go to the next slide, you're familiar that with large movements like evangelicalism, which is a global movement within Christianity. This is in Cape Town in 2010. 5,000 leaders get together to look at the future of evangelicalism, and this is growing in most places, but again, evangelicals are migrating and moving around all over the world, so this is an important movement to keep track of. Next slide, we have the other large movement, which is even bigger, and that's Pentecostals and Charismatics. This is about 600 million people, and by the way, back with evangelicals, I should say, depending on who's measuring and how, it's between 300 million and 550 million. But this is about 600 million, and this is made up of three parts. One is the classical Pentecostal groups like Assemblies of God. The next part is the charismatics within the mainline churches, including the Catholic Church. And the third part is all the huge independent charismatic movements, many based in Africa, the house churches in China that are charismatic, and then groups like the Vineyard and many others. So that is also a very, very large movement, growing very rapidly. Okay, next we have just a quick look at some regional trends. You can see, we mentioned this before, Africa changing from just 9% Christian in 1910 to almost half. We're getting close to half. Of course, the vast majority are in sub-Saharan Africa. In northern Africa, there's still very few Christians, except for the large Coptic Christian community in Egypt. So you're probably familiar with this. Let's go to the next slide and then talk about Western Asia, which is usually include a little bit of northern Africa to get something called the Middle East. And I think most of you, again, are aware that Christianity has been shrinking in this area, and this is the area that it has shrunk the most over the 100 years. And it may be even less than 5% Christian because of present trends, even by 2020. So this is on a lot of people's minds and will be something to consider in the years ahead. Let's move to Europe, the next slide. This is interesting because Europe includes Russia, all of Russia. This is the United Nations designation. And so you get a very strange trend here, and that is that Europe, which was 95% Christian in 1910, fell to only 75% Christian by 1970, but is expected to be 78% Christian by 2020. And hidden beneath this is the resurgence of religion in Russia, which is going against, of course, the trend of secularization in Western Europe, Northern Europe, even in Southern Europe. So we'll have to keep an eye on this, and you can look at the individual pieces to see exactly how this is progressing. Next we have Latin America, and Latin America was largely Christian in 1910, but we have these internal movements which have grown very rapidly within Christianity, both the evangelical and what we call renewalists, who are those Pentecostal charismatics. Again, a very vibrant and large movements in Latin America. And next we have Northern America, which is experiencing, as you're again probably aware, a lot of people saying they are none when they're asked for their religious preference. Some of you also have seen this report, which says that 68% of these people believe in God, so it's not quite sure what it is that they're reporting here. Perhaps an aversion to institutional religion. It should also be noted that immigration into the United States is pushing on these numbers and, of course, adding more to the Christian side, and also through immigration of Muslims and Hindus and others. So the Northern America is becoming increasingly diverse through this. Then finally we have Oceania, which is, in a demographic sense, what happens in Australia and New Zealand dwarf the rest. But it is very interesting to study places like Vanuatu or Fiji, and these places have all seen remarkable changes in both the composition of Christians and in other religious groups that are coming in as well. So all over the world, there's really fascinating things to study. Next slide. Let me say just a word about religion in general. This is from this book, which we published last year, which is an introduction to international religious demography, which is just a short way of saying counting religion religionists and non-religionists around the world. Here's some quick comments. The next slide gives you some indication of where we get all of these numbers, which is often a question asked in these lectures. We have censuses with religion questions. That's about half of the countries of the world. Then ethnicity is often measured in censuses, and sometimes religion and ethnicity are very close together, like the recent influx of Somalis into the United States, most of whom, or most all of whom, are Muslims. It gives you some indication. Then we have surveys and polls, scholarly monographs, religious statistics, governmental reports, all sorts of source material that we use. The next slide shows probably one of the most interesting trends today, and that is the world in 2010 is less religious than that of 1910. There's no doubt about that. But there's been a shift in recent years, and that is that you can see on this graph that agnostics, the number of non-religious but not atheists, have been falling since 1970. And if you put this together with a very similar chart on atheists, what it means is that the world of 2010 is more religious than that of 1970. And this is where you get people talking about religious resurgence around the world. It's really this trend, and it's the collapse of communism that's behind it. And that's, of course, relating to the Soviet Union. But even in places like China, which has a lot of people, we see a resurgence of religion of all kinds. And as long as that continues, then the number of agnostics and percentage of agnostics in the world is going to continue to fall. And religion, the percentage of people who profess a religion, will continue to go up. And this, of course, is completely at odds with what most sociologists said in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. Many people expected religion to disappear by the year 2000, and that's not the case. Okay, the next slide shows the importance of Christianity and Islam, and that is, remarkably, Christians and Muslims together were a third of the world's population in 1800, and that has been steadily increasing in both religions, so that we together by 2100 will be 66%. So what it's saying is from 1/3 of the world's population together in 1800 to 2/3 of the world's population. This, of course, from a demographic point of view, means this is a very important relationship to watch in the present and in the future. Okay, the next slide shows that Christians and Muslims disproportionately are on the move as migrants. This is the Pew study. Again, that's easy to access on the web. Remember, Christians 33% of the world's population, but 49% of all migrants. And so this is another trend within global Christianity that has to be watched very closely. Next, we have a slide showing the religious diversity of Asia, and this is where Christianity is growing in the present. And you can see from this map that you have Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, shamanists, Christians, all mixed together here on the map, and it will make it one of the most interesting places to live as a Christian, and perhaps to be a model for the rest of Christians, as we'll see in a minute. Next slide. This shows a very interesting trend. You might call this the disappearance of Christendom. And what this shows is that almost all Christians lived in a country that was 80% or more Christian back in 1900, and that has fallen now below 60%, closer to 50%. And that means that Christians are increasingly living in diverse religious and non-religious situations. Again, very important for the future. Next slide is some of our research related to Christian mission and to interfaith relations. We have shown that 86% of all Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists do not personally know a Christian. So Christians are out of contact with these three major blocks and with others as well. And this is a very serious problem from a societal point of view and from a missiological point of view. In other words, both in society, you would hope that there would be strong friendships across the religions, and within the Christian mission, of course, it makes no sense to talk about spreading the gospel around the world when people do not even know Christians. So we think this is the biggest challenge for Christianity in the 21st century. The next slide, we go now to our response, and I'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes. What do we do about this besides spill our coffee in the shape of the earth, which was an amazing achievement? First of all, next slide is, let's talk a little bit about identification. What is your primary identification as a Christian? We talked about fragmentation as a problem within Christianity, and I think this is a pretty important question about where you place your primary identity, whether that's in a Christian denomination or even a language or a region, any of these sort of things. That would be a problem. And that reminds me of a book, the next slide, The Buddhist Case Against Treating Christianity as Just a Bunch of Little Parts, different denominations and languages and all of that. And of course that's the famous picture of the blind men who encounter the elephant, all describing it in a different way. And author of a book on Buddhism said there are not really Buddhisms because there's one elephant that is being encountered here. And I would say a similar thing with Christianity. That's important. Next slide talks a little bit, or shows us about civility as a challenge that we have. And if we go to the next slide, I'll have to tell you just one more joke that was told to me by the sociologist Peter Berger. It comes from a Christian comedian, I think in the Wheaton area, and it goes like this. Once I saw a guy on a bridge about to jump, and I said, "Don't do it." He said, "Nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" He said, "A Christian." I said, "Me too. Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too. Which franchise?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. I said, "Die, heretic," and pushed him over. So again, the question of how important identity is within the Christian faith. Is it really that narrow? And how are we going to get along with our fellow Christians? Okay, well finally, what about cooperation? That's the next slide. And we're just going to wrap up here. The next slide after cooperation here shows all the different parts of an automobile. And a lot of people, when they look at this, they think this is Christianity. It's just a bunch of different parts. They're not fitted together. They're just laid out over the floor like this. But you can see that I'm making the appeal in talking about global Christianity to go to the final slide now, which is the automobile itself. And I believe that Christianity is made up of all these pieces around the world, denominations, languages, cultures, and yet it is one identifiable thing. And that's my hope for the future of Christianity. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Let's give Dr. Johnson a warm round of applause.
Agent, I can't hear.
Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for that very clear, lucid presentation of some of the major trends of global Christianity. I first laid eyes on the Atlas of Global Christianity in 2010. I was in Croatia at the time, teaching at a seminary there in Osijek, and Peter Kuzmic, whom I know you know very well, had brought a copy of it with him to Eastern Europe. He told me it was the first copy to reach Eastern Europe, and he said that I could spend the evening with it. So that night I got less sleep than I had intended because I was very eager to be working through that book. It's an honor to have you with us. Dr. Carpenter, you've done a lot of research on a very similar topic here. Can I ask you that question while we're getting Dr. Johnson back online? What do these massive demographic changes in world Christianity mean, especially for the Christian university?
I think it changes everything. That the basic understanding of what you're doing as Christian universities was very much shaped by the development of Christian university in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in many respects, the model of what it means to be a Christian scholar, a Christian student, a Christian university, is based on the Christian humanist tradition of the West. But now Christianity is pervasive worldwide, and so you think, for example, of the ancient question of the church. Tertullian, I think, said it. What does Jerusalem have to do with Athens? Well, now you say, what does Jerusalem have to do with Beijing? What does it have to do with Banjul in West Africa? What does it have to do with Buenos Aires in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
So what it means to be a Christian humanist means to be asking gospel and culture questions on the ground in all of these places, seriously encountering all of these older cultures.
Dr. Carpenter, you've just finished a global survey of Christian education. Does it also mean structural changes for the university, or is this mostly a philosophical and ideological openness and change?
Well, what we've seen is several hot spots in the world where Christian universities are being created. And in some other places, such as in Eastern Europe, you see the revival, the resurgence of Christian university. I think, for example, of a Reformed Protestant university in Budapest, Karoli Gaspar University. It was taken over by the communists and made a state university when Hungary became under a communist regime. In the days since communism, the state has given it back to the church. So how do you remake a Christian university? It's interesting to see at least 50 new Christian universities arising in Africa. So I think there's an important moment going on in these churches and Christian movements. You might call it a now what moment, right? So evangelization has gone on apace. Churches have been founded, and many people have come to faith, and they've begun to witness to their neighbors. But they're saying, now what? Is there other work that the Lord would have us to do in this nation? And I think as the found Christian universities, they are saying, yes, the Lord wants us to engage this culture, this society, this polity, this economy, this artistic world as Christians. He wants us to help build Christianity and root it here in this place. And so Christian universities potentially are powerful for Christian cultural engagement.
So let me address a question to you if I can, Dr. Robert, and that is this. I know you're a distinguished historian of Christian missions. You see the long perspective back in time of what Christian missions has been and meant. What does Christian missions look like for the future, given all of these massive changes?
We've seen a lot of focus on the geographic expansion of Christianity. But Dr. Johnson brings up the issue of fragmentation. And I think it's time for the world Christian movement to recognize that to be the church means not just extending across space, but across time, across generations. To be apostolic is not just a matter of geographic expansion, but of spreading down through the generations. What we find when people become Christian is they want to spread that to their children. And this means grabbing onto this promise of abundant life. So I think we see throughout the history of Christianity that Christians focus on education, healing, sound relationships, respect for women and children. These are things that we need to discuss as the Christian movement becomes more fragmented. What does it mean to be in relationship with each other as Christians around the world? If we don't address that question, then the faith will not expand or spread from one generation to the next. So I think while I am happy to focus on the geographic aspects of world Christianity, we must think about what does it mean to go back from Jesus down into the future. Remember, the cross is both vertical and horizontal. And so going back to our roots and projecting forward across the generation means sharing praise and worship, as we see in Revelation 7, and it means working together for the things that bring abundant life. And being a moral community, as Dr. King said, that we now live in a world house. What does it mean to be common members of a world house, a family?
Yeah, we just needed to restart.
Thank you for that reflection. Dr. Robert and Dr. Carpenter and Dr. Johnson, Dr. Robert, you've identified their unification and closeness of relationship between Christians as something that's necessary to carry on a heritage of mission work. What would those instruments of unity be? And I'm thinking, of course, of the Christian University, but expand my imagination. What are those instruments of Christian unity today?
It's very interesting how the millennial generation is driven by relationality. Where I sit in my School of Theology and University, a very high percentage of students go on study abroad programs. They are thinking of what their mission in life is as they're being formed in their careers and vocations. So I think another vehicle we should be examining is, what does it mean to have cross-cultural relationships coming out of our educational experiences, coming out of our church identities? What does it mean to love each other as Jesus commanded us to do? So in that sense, the Christian educational institution is often a place where that kind of reaching out and focus on loving relationships potentially could start.
Thank you for that. Dr. Carpenter, what are the instruments of Christian unity? If that is one of the larger tasks on the missiological table, how do we do that?
Well, I think that's one of the big challenges of our time. And I think especially the United States. Yeah, the U.S. is increasingly a magnet for world Christianity. And that's due to immigration. Every kind of Christianity in the world, practically, is here in the United States. I'll just give you the example of Grand Rapids quickly. So here we are in upper Midwest. The census says it's the whitest part of the country. But we have a remarkable assembly of new congregations. We have 3 different Sunni congregations in the in Grand Rapids. So we have an Ethiopian Orthodox congregation. We have an Ethiopian Evangelical congregation. We must have 36 new Latino congregations. And the list goes on. There's a little Baptist church I passed on my morning walk today. They have the traditional Anglo congregation. They have the Michigan Kachin Baptist Fellowship meeting there. That's people from Burma. And they have an African American Charismatic Fellowship there. And they have a Korean congregation. So they're all using the same building. And the challenge is this anything more than parallel play? What's the quality of fellowship there? My own home church, we built a new congregation out on the east side of town, and many members mourned the fact that we are no longer meeting in a school gym in the inner city. But little did we know, right across the street is a huge hub-subsidized apartment complex. It is the first residence for all kinds of immigrants and refugees coming to live in our town. And our church timidly at first started to build relationships, started teaching English as a second language, joined the Refugee Support Network, and it has totally transformed the church. So we have people from 20 different nations in our church, and it has made for practical fellowship and ministry that was unimaginable before. But that's the challenge and the opportunity in the United States, in every city, even in white bread Grand Rapids. So you want to think about mission work, you don't have to travel very far. And just as a sidelight, we have missionaries coming to Grand Rapids. A man down the street on my block, he and his wife were from the Dominican Republic. and they founded 6 Adventist congregations in Grand Rapids. So those are the opportunities for fellowship, these national and ethnic lines. They're practical and they're local.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that reflection. Can I get confirmation whether Dr. Johnson can participate? Great. We've got Dr. Johnson with us again. Dr. Robert, Dr. Carpenter, if you'd like to speak directly to him.
Well, Todd, one of the most striking slides you put up, I thought, was the one about migration. So Christians are the world's most mobile people. What do you think that says about the future of Christian faith and witness in the world?
Well, I actually think it's similar to what you were just talking about in Grand Rapids, is that it increases greatly the chances that Christians from many different backgrounds from all over the world will be in contact with each other. But I do think you're right also in saying that proximity is only part of the problem or even the solution, and that we do need to work very actively together. And it's exciting to see this in the United States, but it's happening all over the world. When I was living in Chiang Mai, Thailand on sabbatical a few years ago, I was able to worship with Christians from hill tribes in northern Thailand, from India, from Indonesia, from Laos and Bhutan, and I think that's really exciting, and that's probably the main benefit of the movement of Christians around the world.
I think Dr. Johnson is making a wonderful point, which is that our common worship together is one of the main ways that world Christianity matters to us. As we worship with others, we have new insight into what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And that's just very important, an important reason for us to be aware of the scope and the diversity in Christianity in the 21st century.
Thank you for that. May I ask our students, we'll take one question from the students to any of you, is that all right?
Sure.
Let me ask, shoot up a hand if anybody would like to ask a question of our speaker or panelists. Okay. No, you're fine.
So this is a question for Dr. Todd Johnson, and I was wondering, so the example you gave of Asia, Asia not being, seeing Christianity as foreign, Western, I was wondering if that is because distribution is not even, or if it's because, like, the West has all the money and they're just not distributing it properly, or is there another reason that they view Christianity as Western, as foreign?
Yes, that's a very good question. Part of what you need to answer that question is even a broader view of the demographics of Christian history. I was just in Uzbekistan a few weeks ago, and I was telling them a story about the fact that my people, my ancestors, came to Christ about the year 800. This is the Vikings, you know, and they weren't very nice, and they became Christians by killing other people and enslaving them, and then finally the gospel sunk in after decades. So it's not a very glamorous story. On the other hand, my Uzbek friends had become Christians their ancestors became Christians about the year 300 or 350, much earlier than me and my ancestors. And they were actually surprised to hear this. There are a couple of books out there called The Lost History of Christianity in Asia, The Hidden History of Christianity in Asia. So we know that not much is known about this. In fact, until about the year 920, Asians and Africans outnumbered European Christians. So if we go that far back, almost 1,000 years of Asian and African Christianity dominating really demographically. So if you fast forward to the Reformation to 1500, through the Black Death and through Tamerlane and the rise of Islam and a whole other things, you get so that 92% of all Christians at the time of the Reformation were Europeans. So this is a huge imbalance, and that imbalance continued, as you saw, all the way to 1910. 80% of Christians were still European. And the Professor Scott Sundquist calls this problem that we're looking at. He calls it the long shadow of Christendom. So Christendom being this dominant European demographic, way of being a Christian, aligned with the state and all that sort of thing. It has a very long shadow, and that long shadow is cast over Asians. And what it means is that for most Asians, Christianity is thought of in the terms of Western Christendom, you might say. And it's really just a historical reality. So that's the challenge then, is overcoming that history and that that way of thinking about Christianity.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been our pleasure to host you. We're extremely grateful to have had you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dana Robert, Collins Professor of World Christianity. Thank you so much, Dr. Joel Carpenter, for coming in with us, Director of the Nagel Institute for the Study of World Christianity. Dr. Johnson, it's been our honor to learn from you today, the Director for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Thanks also for your patience with the technology in this experiment. And class, would you give them a warm thank you?